Well, 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 well. What is going on here? Where's Matt? He's supposed to start preaching now. Where is he? Well, I'm right here, you dum-dums. Yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you? I'm supposed to be up on stage. I'm supposed to be ready. But I was sitting out here with you. Many of you didn't see that coming. That was unexpected. I'm supposed to start immediately when the lights come on. I didn't. That was unexpected. I'm always back there and then I come out this way. I didn't. That was unexpected. And so, just like tonight, so often in life, many times, many times, we experience in our lives the unexpected. It's something we have to face, something we have to fight. We have the unexpected transpire in our lives. And maybe it's in big, dramatic, serious ways, and maybe it's in more minuscule, unimportant ways. Like the other day, when I was at a public place. I'm not going to say it's Target, but I'm not going to not say it's Target. And I had to use the restroom. And I thought, my expectation was, I can go in there and use it. But what actually happened is a guy came out and was like, hey, I'd give it a minute before you go in there. That was unexpected. I was wondering what happened in there. What was he doing? What kind of heat was dropped? And so that was unexpected. Maybe I've had this one happen this winter. Maybe this one that resonates with you guys. This is minuscule, not that important. But I like a warm shower in the morning in the winter. How I love a warm shower in the morning in the winter. And I have a whole routine. You just turn on the faucet, you go do your stuff, and then you come back and you're just like, oh, it's going to feel good. And then you get in there, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but it feels like a million tiny knives sticking into your back because it's cold water, and you're like, oh. And that's unexpected. That's happened to me on a couple of different occasions. That's unexpected. Maybe you guys have this in like relationships. Fellas in the room, I hope this isn't you, but it honestly is probably going to be at some point. There was this girl in college, and I kind of had a crush on her. Sorry, Brooke, this was a long time ago, many moons ago. And she wanted to hang out with me, and I was like, cool, that's amazing. Maybe she's into me. And so we went and hung out, and my expectation was, oh, she's interested. But then, as I talked to her, she talked about some other guy the whole time. That was unexpected. I didn't see that coming. And I got friend zoned really hard. That was unexpected. Girls, maybe you've had a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I like this guy. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then you notice the guy notices you. So you're like, oh my gosh, is he going to come talk to me? Or maybe he texts you and you're like, oh, he texted me. Oh, I got to respond. And then when you go to do that, the guy either comes up to you or responds, hey, is your friend single? That's unexpected. That's unexpected. You didn't see that coming. Ouch, though. And so we have these situations in life. Maybe with your grades. Maybe you studied long and hard, and you labored over a test, and you left the classroom and were like, man, I'm going to get charged with 3 counts of murder because I just killed that test. And then you get your results back, and then all of a sudden you're like, what happens? Was it like, it looked like I was trying to get the wrong answers, and it's just like dripping in red ink. You're like, what is going on? My gosh. Or maybe you're like me, and you're not good at standardized testing, but you're like, I've always made good grades. I work hard in school. I'll do well. And then you get like your ACT or your SAT back, and you're like, awesome. My expectation was that I could go to college with this, and it's telling me that I have a 2nd grade math level. That's unexpected. I only can apply to schools in Arkansas now because that's going to limit my search. And so we experience the unexpected. And that's what we're going to deal with, and that's how we're actually going to kick off our series in Philippians, which we are super excited about. Paul, who wrote the letter, he's experiencing the unexpected. He's had some stuff transpire in his life that was unexpected. But then, for all this unexpected bad, God is going to do some unexpected good. So, to transition from here, I need everyone to hold up their book, if you have a booklet. You got a booklet? Got a booklet? All right, now hold up your hand if you need a booklet. Okay, someone, oh dang, we need just like 1, 2 up here. If someone can run one, just 2 here. All right, open up your booklets and you'll flip a couple pages and you'll just see the first day of sermon notes. And so you can start taking notes in this. I even left you a space to draw. Some of you like to do artwork. Some of you have done really beautiful artwork. When I go visit your groups, I'm very impressed by this. You can take notes, you can write, or you can draw the sermon if you're more aesthetic in your processing. But you're going to get your books, and we're going to set the scene before we get into the scriptures, okay? We're going to set the scene. And this is how Philippians starts. And we talked about this a little bit last series. Paul is in Rome, and it's 62 AD, and Rome is kind of the capital of the known world. And Paul's there. He's at a desk, but he's not free. He's at his house, but he's not free. He's riding, but he's not free. He is in chains. And Paul is under house arrest. And so Paul, not going anywhere. And this is what they did in Rome. If you were going to go to court, there's a couple different things that could happen. If you did something wrong, they'd either drag you immediately to court, or they'd put you on house arrest where you would be guarded. We'll talk more about that later. Or they would throw you in a nasty prison that was like 12 feet underground, like Paul was when he went to Philippi, which we talked about last week. So Paul's kind of in a better situation, and it's kind of nice because he's at home, but he's in chains, and he's being guarded. And he's writing this letter in 62 AD, but he's writing to a church. That was like a magic trick. He's writing to a church that he visited in Philippi, the church at Philippi, and he visited them in 52 AD. And so if you're keeping track at home, keeping score at home, that's 10 years that they've known each other. And so we did a series the last 3 weeks called Before Philippians. And what we did is we wanted to look at what happened between Paul and the Philippians. Like, what was their story? What was their shared experiences? And we told you guys that it's important when we're going to study Philippians to know the background, to know the origin story of Paul and the Philippians, to know the culture, to know the context, to know the characters involved, and to know the relationship, because it helps us extract the meaning and understand things as we approach Philippians. So that's what we hope we did over the last 3 weeks, that we laid a foundation, introduced you to some important characters in Philippi, like Lydia and the jailer, and told you a little bit more about Paul. And all this stuff is important. And what we want to do as we step into Philippians is constantly point back to before Philippians and say, hey, remember this? Hey, remember that? And there's something about our brains that actually enjoys making this connection. Right now in Hollywood, it is red hot to have any kind of like an expanded universe. So like Star Wars has a whole universe. Marvel has a whole universe. Like Harry Potter has a whole universe. And people love this because it's a bunch of, like a cluster of movies, but they're all interconnected. And you watch this movie and it ties back to this movie. And then like with Marvel movies, you're like, oh, the post-credit scene connected to the beginning of this one, which actually was like before this one. So now, and it's all interconnected. And they'll make references to stuff and you can be like, oh yeah, that was from that. Okay, I get it. And our brains like making those connections. So we're going to try to make a lot of those as we get into the text today. And so Paul in prison, he's not in prison actually, but he's for all intents and purposes in prison, under house arrest in Rome, and he's in chains, writing to this church in Philippi. And so we're going to actually jump right into chapter 1, and we're going to go to verse 3. And what we're going to see early on, kind of our roadmap here today, is just 3 quick things. We're going to talk about Paul's affection for the Philippians and establish their relationship. Then we're going to kind of get to the problem. We're going to talk about Paul's chains and what he has to say about those. And then we're going to kind of talk about the resolve where we see what Paul's hope is and where Paul's hope is placed. So, chapter 1, we're going to start in verse 3. And this is what Paul says. He says, I thank my God in all my remembrances of you, and all my remembrance of you. Stop right there. So this is how we're going to kind of roll in Philippians. We're going to stop when we need to stop and explain some stuff and then keep going. He says, in all my remembrance of you. The you here is the church at Philippi that Paul's known for 10 years. He's tight with them. He loves them. He's close with them. And so when Paul's remembering them, he's remembering everything we talked about in the last 3 weeks. Oh, yeah, I remember when I went there and I met Lydia. And then there was that girl that was being human trafficked that we helped and we rescued. And then we met the Philippian jailer. And then 10 more years of stuff we don't even know about. Paul's remembering them, and he has fondness in his heart for them. He has love for them in his heart, So then he says, always and in every prayer of mine for you, all making my prayer with joy. All right, so this is an important word. This is an essential word to Philippians. This word for joy, I'm going to teach you one Greek word tonight. The word in Greek for joy is the word chara. All right, you guys try it. Chara. I know it's like you're hacking a loogie there. Chara, right? Which men, can we stop doing that? Men do that all the time. My wife called me out on it. Now I see it all the time. Men constantly, guys, stop. Tighten up. Anyway, sidebar. So this word chara, it's just joy. Now here's the thing with joy. Joy is not happiness. Happiness is circumstantial and situational. You know, guys could be like, I'm very successful and I have a 401k and things are going really well. I'm very happy. Or girls could be like, oh my gosh, like all this stuff. I'm just working up at work. Things are going well. My love life, my work life, everything. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. And so that's happiness. That'll come and go. Joy is a bit more persistent. Joy is a bit more grounded. Joy actually persists and perseveres through suffering, through struggling. Happiness, it's kind of delicate. It has to have like the right conditions. Joy is like, nah, it has perseverance. And so Paul has joy, not fickle happiness that will come and go. He has this deep sense of peace, of happiness, of contentment, which we'll learn about here in a couple weeks, that pierces through his suffering, and that is in spite of the chains in which he finds himself. And so this is joy. And some people would actually say that joy is the overarching theme of Philippians. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think there's actually a bigger theme. However, joy is the most used word. Chara and the verb form of chara, which is charao, which we'll see later, combined is something like used like 16 times in Philippians. So it's an important central word. Again, I don't think it's the overarching theme, but it is an essential idea. And so Paul, despite the situation in which he finds himself, despite his chains that he's having to live in and lug around, he has great joy. And so let's go back to our verse. So then he says, he's making this prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel. So he's remembering them, he has joy, and because of their partnership in the gospel. Now, a lot of times we don't pump the brakes here, but I want to pump the brakes real quick. Let's talk about the gospel. I feel like in church world a lot of times we just throw this word around. The gospel, the gospel, the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. But sometimes I don't think we actually stop to explain it. So if you're new to church, or if you're new to faith, or if you honestly have just always heard this word and never really heard it unpacked and explained, I kind of want to define this for us and kind of give us a working definition. Because with the gospel, I mean, you can have a definition that's this wide or this narrow. And so I think the best way to talk about the gospel is just the big story of what God is doing in the world. From Genesis to Revelation, what God is doing to redeem people. We as people turn away from God. We have broken connection with each other so often. And on our own accord, like we're in big trouble. But God in his kindness has always moved towards his people. God has always brought more of his peace on earth and has always led his people. And in fact, in the Old Testament, God's like, whoa, 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 sin is getting crazy and out of control. So here's the deal, sacrificial system. So you understand the weight of your sin, but the glory of my grace. And so there was a sacrificial system in the Old Testament. But then in the New Testament, God's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take on flesh and make my dwelling among them. I'm going to send my son, Jesus, and he's going to fulfill that sacrificial system. He's going to become the once sacrifice, once for all, to pay for all sin. And not just that, before even that, Jesus is going to show people the way I intended for them to live. He's going to give them a life and a ministry and teaching that they are going to abide by and follow. And then he was going to take all the punishment for their sin, and then a lot of times we stop there. And we're like, Jesus took the penalty for my sin. And we call that the gospel. That's not the gospel, because if Jesus took our penalty for sin and died, that's not actually good news because he's still dead. But the really good news is that Jesus rose from the grave, that Jesus did not stay dead, and that Jesus actually ascended to the right hand of the Father, and Jesus demonstrated his lordship over sin and death. And the early church had a really firm grasp on this. They were like, yeah, Jesus wins, Jesus is Lord. And as a quick kind of historical note, the word for gospel in Greek is euangelion, which means good news. And in the Roman world in which Paul lived and the Philippians lived, the euangelion, the good news, was that Caesar, the guy who ruled the world, was Lord. And so the early church was like, okay, that's not true. Jesus is Lord. And that was their gospel. They're like, no, Jesus, the fulfillment of all God's promises. Jesus, the one who procured for us a salvation and who gave us grace and forgiveness of sin. Jesus, who showed us the way to live, who showed us the way to exist in the world, and who took our penalty and our punishment for sin, and he lived a life we couldn't live, died a death we couldn't die, paid a debt we couldn't pay, and he rose again. That's the good news, and now he's leading his people onward. That's the gospel. That's the good news. And because of that, Jesus is Lord, and we follow him. We're not distracted by other things. We're not led astray by other things. We're not afraid of Caesar. No, Jesus is Lord. We follow him. That was the gospel, man. That's what Paul was adamant about. That was what Paul was juiced up about to tell people. And he partners, if we go back to the verse, he's partnering with the church in Philippi to help spread the gospel, to help teach the gospel to people. And he says, he's grateful, he has joy because of their partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Again, cool callback here. 2 weeks ago, we talked about when Paul landed in Philippi, he's walking around with his boys trying to find a place to worship, and he finds this woman named Lydia who's worshiping by a riverside. And so when he's talking about the first day he got to Philippi, I would imagine that as Paul's sitting here, he's thinking back to his friend Lydia that we talked about 2 weeks ago. This woman who was a leader and he was leading people in worship and helped build the church in Philippi. So he's probably like, oh, Lydia, I miss her. And so that's probably what is going on in Paul's head. So again, there's this continuity here. So then he goes on, he says, I love this part, he says, I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. And Paul does this really cool thing here where he's talking about the Philippians, and he shifts tense here. He says, he who began a good work in the past will carry it on into the future. God has used you guys in the past, and he's going to use you all the more in the future. And what I love about this is we see here by this first kind of opening section, Paul does a greeting, and then he moves to this. Paul loves them. He loves the Philippians. And what's more, he believes in them. He says, hey, it brings me great joy when I think about you guys, when I remember everything we've been through. Man, we partner in the gospel. We both know the gospel, the whole story of God's grace and kindness and redemption, and we partner in that. And I remember the first day I met you, man. I remember that first day. And then I know that God's going to keep doing a work in you. And so we establish here in this first section their relationship, their fondness, their fidelity, and their connection to one another. And I think this is a cool thing to point out, because I can tell you unequivocally that as a pastor here, our whole team here, all the group leaders, and honestly the staff at North Metro Church, in similar fashion and likewise, they love you guys and they believe in you guys. And so we have the same kind of fondness towards you students here. North Metro is about the next generation. We're inclined towards the next generation. And so as we start in Philippians, I thought this was cool, this opening section that Paul writes, because I vibe with Paul on this. Like, I feel Paul on this. We love you guys here at North Metro, and we believe in you guys, and we want to invest in you guys just like Paul did with the Philippians. So I encourage you now, as we step into this study, I hope you guys grow and mature in your faith and are encouraged in this. And so as we move from this first section, where Paul's establishing a relationship, he's just letting him know his affection for them, he then transitions to kind of this problem. And he's going to talk about kind of what's going on with him, some difficulties he's enduring. And this is what he says in verse 12. Let's throw it up. Paul says, now, I want you to know that what has happened to me, what happened was, he has really served to advance the gospel. Now, let's talk about this for a minute. What has happened to me? Again, there were some unexpected things that happened to Paul that landed him under house arrest. And Paul is in chains. So he's talking about being in chains, that which has happened to me. It's all the unexpected stuff that happened to Paul that landed him in chains. We'll talk about it week 4. All this stuff, these chains that I'm lugging around, what I thought was going to hold me down and hamper me and not let me do ministry, actually, kind of weirdly, is helping spread the gospel. Plot twist, that was unexpected. Paul being in chains was unexpected. Unexpectedly bad. But God is actually leveraging it, kind of using it for an unexpected good. Now, we have to ask ourselves, okay, how? If Paul's under house arrest and he's in chains, so like, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? Well, here's the deal. Paul points out who he's getting to have influence with, opportunity to influence with. He says, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest. We got to stop there. The imperial guard and all the rest. Let me explain this to you. The imperial guard were not just your average guards. The actual phrase for this in Greek, and who it's referring to, is the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard. And the Praetorian Guard were like the best of the best of the best of the best of the best guards in the Roman Empire. A lot of them were probably like former military generals that were highly successful and who won many victories and were kind of allowed to step away from the military. And these were the dudes that would normally guard like the important people, okay? So it's like the Secret Service, okay? Less like earpieces and sunglasses, more like Roman soldier helmets. But like they were super successful. They were like the best of the best. And these are the guys guarding Paul. Which is kind of weird because, like, Paul, like, what's he? He's not like a general or a warrior, but, like, the best of the best guards are guarding him. And when you're under house arrest, every 4 hours, the guards would switch over. And so every 4 hours, Paul would have a new Praetorian guard with him, a new influential person. And so Paul was able actually to advance the gospel. The literal translation is the gospel progressed because of what happened, because he was able to talk to these dudes that were guarding him, and it would be a new person every 4 hours. So Paul would be like, oh no, how am I going to share my faith with people? How am I going to tell people about Jesus? Oh. And so he would start to tell the guards. But here's the deal. It said that it spread to all the rest. Well, Paul didn't have the opportunity to go tell all the soldiers and all the people following these Praetorian guards about Jesus and to share the gospel with them. Instead, he had some of the most influential people in Rome that could go tell everyone else. So Paul, instead of trying to share the gospel with like 300 soldiers, he could just tell like one Praetorian guard, and he would have a way bigger influence, way bigger impact. And that's actually kind of a side note. That's kind of true today in church. We try to, I can't tell everybody about Jesus. I can't share the gospel with everybody. I can't go in your schools all the days, every day. That'd be super weird and creepy and exhausting. But I can influence you guys so you guys can influence others. And that's what Paul experiences. Even as he's in chains, it's actually giving him this opportunity to be around these very influential people in the capital of the known world at the time. And so Paul's seen the gospel advance. And then here's another really cool thing that happens. Other people are encouraged. So he says, my imprisonment is for Christ. So everyone knows that. And most of the brothers and sisters, Paul's friends outside of prison, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So people that Paul's writing letters to, because this is what Paul's doing, he's furiously writing letters to everyone, sending out letters. People that hear about what's happening with Paul are super encouraged by this. Because they're like, whoa, Paul's in chains, Paul's in prison, Paul's being guarded by the best of the best, and he's actually having influence, and the gospel is spreading, not just to the Praetorian Guard, but to all of their guards and all their soldiers and all their people. And so this was encouraging, and it made the other Christians that Paul was writing to feel more emboldened, more confident to share their faith. So to illustrate this to you in kind of another way, I'll give you a little experience from my high school. I was a moron in high school and did a lot of dangerous stuff that I shouldn't have done. But before I would do anything dangerous, and before my friends and I would partake in anything dangerous, we had a friend named Gary. And Gary would do anything because Gary was crazy. And so like if Gary was here now, I'd be like, hey, Gary, I want to see if you can parkour up the wall, hang from the rafters. Okay, I'm not done yet. Upside down. I'm not done yet. By your shoelaces. So just tie your shoelaces, hang upside down like a bat. Go for it. And Gary would probably be like, let's go! And he would go do it. Gary was insane. We had very different personalities, but I just like to see what he would do. And so if we wanted to do something dumb or had a harebrained idea, we would be like, oh, you know what we should do? We should do this. And we'd be like, hold up. Let's have Gary do it, and we'll make sure it's okay. And so we would have Gary do stuff. So like one time, I lived in a subdivision, okay? So it's like not out in the country. And we decided to take a sled and to hook it to the back of my truck. Do not try this at home. Do not try. Disclaimer, do not try this at home. And we wanted to drag the sled behind my truck on the road. But of course, I'm not going to risk myself. So I was like, Gary, get back there. And Gary's like, okay. So he gets back there. And so we're in my truck, and we're driving around, and I asked my friend, I'm like, is Gary alive? Has he died yet? And he's like, no, Gary's good. So we're like, hey, Gary, you good? And he'd be like, yeah, good, yeah. And so we're like whipping him all over the place. I should mention, this was not in the winter when it was snowing. This was in the middle of the summer on the street. So it was even more dangerous. And so because of that, we were emboldened. We were like, okay, my turn. Because we saw Gary and we're like, oh, Gary's okay. Okay, we can do it too. And that's kind of how people felt about Paul. They looked at Paul and they're like, oh, Paul's good. Paul's killing it out there. We should hop in too. And so they were emboldened. So here's the irony. Paul thinks, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything with my chains. Man, like, what am I going to do for the kingdom here? Paul is given opportunity and influence. And because of that, he's actually encouraging other people, which is amazing. And so then Paul transitions to kind of this last section where he's going to kind of give us some resolve and talk about the hope that he has. He established the relationship, and he spoke of the affection he has for the Philippians. And then he kind of went to this like problem or perceived problem that actually kind of has been to an advantage as the gospel has progressed. And so then he gets to this last section, and this is what he writes in 18. It says, yes, I will rejoice. Now, this is in reference to something that preceded this verse where Paul's talking about people that are preaching the gospel and talking smack about him, and these people aren't preaching the gospel with the right intentions. They're just trying to be like Insta-famous, whatever. And so Paul's like, okay, I don't give two farts about what their intentions are or what they're doing. I just care that people hear the gospel. That's all I really care about. So they can sit down with the rest of it. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and rejoice that the gospel's getting out. I'm good. I'm all set. And so Paul's saying, I will rejoice in spite of my chains, in spite of like all this, people are talking smack about me. Paul's like, I don't know, I'm just going to rejoice. And we see this word again, hurrah, joy. So everyone say, hurrah. Chara, not even close. And this is actually in its verb form, horao. And so we see again this theme of hope kind of connecting to the beginning of Philippians, where Paul, in spite of everything he's going through, his suffering, his chains, his discouragement, he has this joy that persists. And so he talks about his joy, and then he goes on to say this. He says, "For I know that through your prayers and through the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, this will turn out for my deliverance." Now, this kind of might sound weird to us, like, what do you mean this will turn out for your deliverance? If Paul is in chains, how does he get out of the chains? This is going to work out for my deliverance? I don't think it will, Paul, because you're in chains. Well, this would take way too long to unpack. But if you know the context and you know the word that's used, what Paul's basically saying is this is going to work out for a greater good. There's going to be like a greater good that's going to come from this. So despite my chains, despite my imprisonment, God is going to bring about a greater good. God's going to do something that's far beyond me. And here's the deal. With this, it might not be what I thought it would look like, but God's going to do it anyway. And so we see Paul's faith here. And he says, this is going to work out for my deliverance. Now, we're going to circle back to this. And then Paul progresses here. He knows God's going to work this out for good. And then Paul says this. He says, "As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage now as always, Christ Jesus will be honored in my body." So Paul is in prison. Things aren't going well. He's shackled. He could be discouraged. The gospel's actually advancing. And he says, I know this is going to work out for a greater good. This is going to work out for my deliverance. And then his hope is not that he's going to get out of jail someday, out of prison, or that his court hearing is going to go well. His hope is that Jesus will be glorified in his body. And basically that just means he's going to share the gospel, but he's also going to live it out for other people. And so this is Paul's hope. At the end of the day, he starts to worry about himself less and less and less. And his greater concern is honoring Jesus with his life and making the name of Jesus great. And we talked about in before Philippians that in Roman culture, honor was the greatest good. Your whole life was about achieving honor, and dishonor was like worse than death. And so Paul actually skips over this section. He's like, I know I won't be ashamed. Moving on, with full courage now, Christ will be honored in my body. It's like Paul doesn't even care. He's all about Christ being honored. If honor is the highest, greatest good in Roman society, that's what Paul wants. And the word in Greek here actually means to make great. Paul wants Jesus to be made great in his life, and what he says, and what he does, and how he treats others. That's the most important thing. And I can kind of tell you, we're going to circle back to this here in just 1 second. That is such a healthy mental shift. Because if Paul obsesses over his chains and over the fact that he's under house arrest, like he's just going to be bummed out and he's probably going to be useless. But Paul just kind of like, okay, I don't even see my chains. I'm not even focusing on them. I'm not even looking at them. I'm more concerned with the name of Jesus being lifted up. I'm more concerned with sharing the gospel, and that is my hope. And then Paul goes in this amazing part where, I mean, this is where Paul is a G. He says, whether by life or by death. And this is a reoccurring theme and pattern in Philippians. Paul has this like either or mentality. Like Paul's a friend that's like too chill, you know, where you're like, hey, where do you want to go eat? And they're like, I don't care. And you're like, hey, we graduated. And they're like, cool. Or you're like, hey, it's your firstborn. And they're like, what, we had a baby? Like that friend that's like too chill, where you're like, dude, wake up. That's Paul. He's just like, I don't know. I don't care. Whatever. Like by life or by death, it doesn't really matter to me, because what I care about is making Jesus great. By what I say, by what I do, and how I treat others. I just want the gospel to get out. And so there's something so amazing about this to me, because I'm like, man, Paul is a G. He's rejoicing in this circumstance. He knows that God's working for a greater good. And then his hope is that Jesus is lifted up rather than himself, so he's not even focusing on himself. And then he doesn't even care how that is. He's like, I could die, I could not die, whatever. It's all about honoring Jesus, all about worshiping Jesus and making Jesus known. That is courageous, and that is amazing on Paul's part. And so Paul constantly had to face the unexpected in life. And Paul learned that he could not control all that happened in his life, all the events that transpired, because life is crazy. But Paul went with this, is he just learned to just expect the unexpected. Like, okay, this is going to be crazy. Paul's life, oh my gosh, it's all over the place. But then what's more, he kind of went another step, and he learned to embrace the unexpected. And that's where Paul gets to this either-or mentality, which is just like, I don't know, life, death, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I don't know, whichever. Like, I don't care. God, I'm about lifting up your name, making your fame and your renown known. And so Paul had this phrase that I wanted us to hold on to, and this isn't going to be like necessarily like a bottom line thing, but I do want you to write this down, and I want you to take this with you. I want you to internalize this, and when you face situations in life, when you face difficulties, when you face those chains, those things that are burdening you and weighing you down, or those situations that seem kind of hopeless, or like they're really debilitating, or like they're limiting, this phrase that Paul speaks: this will turn out for my deliverance. God is always at work doing something bigger and better than we can even fathom or imagine. And Paul lived with this. And that's why Paul is so chill. And that's why Paul's so juiced up, not about himself or his situation, but about Jesus and about the gospel. And so Paul had all this unexpected stuff happen in his life. His whole journey, from his calling to how he got to Philippi to how he got to Rome, is all just unexpected. And there's a lot of unexpected bad. But then God leveraged that for unexpected good. And as Paul was in house or under house arrest in Rome, he was able to advance the gospel by influencing some of the most influential people in Rome, and like the center of the known world. And I think this is fascinating. Paul actually, this table Paul was at under house arrest is where he wrote Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon. 4 books of the New Testament. 4 books he wrote in the New Testament. And those books have gone on to influence and inspire billions of people and have led billions of people to Jesus or to a greater understanding of the gospel. And that wouldn't have happened, or I don't know, we don't know if it would have happened, but it did happen while Paul was under house arrest. God used that situation. And so Paul had opportunity and influence. And because of this, Paul was able to encourage other Christians and encourage the guards where he was. And it actually worked out for his deliverance. But here's the deal. Here's the crazy part. It didn't work out like Paul may have wanted it to. See, Paul doesn't really get out of house arrest. This is actually towards the end of Paul's life, kind of like his last go-round in ministry. And so Paul doesn't really get freed from the chains or get to leave, but God does something better. God does something bigger. And Paul's able to have a way bigger impact with his life where God had him. And so maybe you guys have some similar unexpected stuff you've had to encounter in your life. And there's too wide of a gamut to cover specifically, but I don't know, maybe you have some stuff going on in your family. Maybe there's some difficulties. Maybe there's an absent parent. Maybe right now your family's going through a split. Or maybe there's just a lot of family drama. Maybe there's some stuff that's tearing your family apart. And what you thought life would look like, things don't look like that, and that's unexpected bad. Maybe you had the loss of a loved one recently, and that's unexpected bad. Maybe with your friend's situation at school, maybe you're at a new school and you don't have any friends, or maybe you had this group of friends and they've kind of dispelled, or maybe you just with yourself, maybe you lived your whole life and you're like, yeah, I've been healthy, I've been good, and then all of a sudden you have this illness, and that's unexpected, and it's kind of these chains, and it's like this stuff that's kind of limiting you or holding you down, or this weight you have to carry and bear. Or maybe you've lived your whole life and you've been like, oh, I'm good. I've always been a pretty cheerful kid. I've been good to go. But like I kind of realized this year, I think I struggle with like depression. I think I struggle with anxiety. And like things were good, and then there's something unexpected. And there's like this weight to bear and these chains to carry around. But here's the deal. Just like God did with Paul, he's going to use that unexpected bad to do some unexpected good. And that's just how God works. He takes these messy situations, these chains, and he'll actually use them and leverage them for good. Just like Paul's chains help to advance and progress the gospel, well, we're given the same kind of opportunity, the same kind of ability to encourage others, and the same platform to honor God with our lives. So no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, whatever that weight is in your life, or whatever that thing you feel like is shackling you, I would say, and I would encourage you in this, you actually have an opportunity in that. You have an opportunity to influence people. Maybe in your family, you're there to influence your family. Some of you I actually know, I've talked to actually a lot of you guys who are like, you're kind of the spiritual leader in your family, or like, you're like the point person in your family. Okay, well, God has you there for a reason, while you might be like, well, I see some of my other like Christian friends, and they got this going on, and that's like, I want that. I feel so like shackled by the fact that like my family doesn't support me in this or they're not like this. No, you know what? Use that situation. Leverage that situation. If you live with an illness, you will come in contact with other people that you have an opportunity to speak into their lives. I never really go into a lot of detail, but I've lived with an illness for like 8 or 9 years. And because of that, I had this connection with other sick people that I never had before. I'm able to like go to hospitals and like provide pastoral care where other people are kind of like, ugh, hospitals are icky. And so it kind of changes the game. And so instead of like viewing my change as something that shackled me, I'm like, no. This actually is something that can advance the gospel, that can bring a little more of God's kingdom to bear on the earth. And in your situations and in the unexpected, you also have the opportunity to encourage people. You can speak hope. So in your family, if there's a death in the family or a divorce in the family or a separation, hey, that's a context. Just like Paul being in prison, that's a context for you to be able to influence people and to encourage others. And maybe you can speak a word of encouragement. Or maybe, just maybe, by your example, you'll be an encouragement to others. Maybe someday you guys, with what you're going through now, the change you have, you're going to go on to be group leaders and you'll have a kid in your group, you'll have a student in your group that you can be like, hey, actually, I went through the same thing. I came from the same place. I had the same thing I had to carry around and live with and walk with in the same kind of weight. And you're going to be able to be an encouragement to them. But most importantly, besides opportunities, besides encouragement, you're going to be able to, in any and every situation, no matter what goes on, focus on bringing honor and praise to Jesus and to share the gospel with others. And again, here's like the best word picture. Paul, instead of just crying on his chains, he was like, you know what? We're just not going to really focus on those. And instead, my hope is to bring honor to Jesus. And so I would encourage you guys, that is one of the best mental practices you can employ. One of the best shifts you can have mentally. Is instead of looking and focusing on the change all the time, oh my gosh, this is going on. This is all this unexpected stuff I have to carry around. You know what? Keep your eyes up. Focus on your opportunities with others, encouraging others, building others up, and then just honoring Jesus with your life, through what you say, through how you treat people, and how you walk out this Christian life of following Jesus. So as you leave here today, I want you to just picture whatever this is, whatever the way you feel shackled, whatever thing you feel like you have to carry around, whatever unexpected thing that transpired in your life to where you're just like, oh my gosh, why? I just want you to picture just kind of dropping it and not focusing on it. And I'm not going to say it's going to go away, but guess what? It's going to turn out for your deliverance. And so when you meet these situations in life, you tell yourself, this will turn out for my deliverance. God is going to do something better. When you face disappointments, you tell yourself, this will turn out for my deliverance. God is going to do something better. As you experience new suffering and new challenges, you tell yourself, God is going to turn this and work this out for my deliverance and for His glory. So don't focus on this. Instead, reassure yourself that this will turn out for my deliverance. Let's pray.